Research fellow in the Thomas A. Rowe Institute for Economic Policy Studies, Alan Mendenhall, and former senior naval intelligence officer and economist, John Jordan. So, Mr. Mendenhall, let me start with you, because you take all that they've said, and the key thing that we're left with is, okay, will they implement these sanctions or any kind of action against China? Because that's the big elephant in the room. What do you think?
Well, I think that was strongly suggested today. And, China traded about $10 billion with Iran last year and was the #1 importer of Iranian oil. And there's actually a 25-year plan that Iran and China have that they instituted back in 2021, and China pledged billions of dollars toward this. So this is significant because it would be, we'd be squeezing cryptocurrency networks and front companies and shipping firms and any type of Chinese intermediary or even Iranian intermediary, which is moving money back and forth and keeping Iran propped up during this time. It's interesting. Iran seems way more panicked about this financial warfare than it has been about the missile warfare.
I actually agree, because clearly they've been able to squirrel away enough things or hide them deep enough that they're still able to come out and cause enough damage to keep the strait effectively almost at a standstill. Mr. Jordan, though, with the whole Chinese thing, do you think that this is one of those things that the president is going to be discussing with Xi when he comes here? Because it really does, in a sense, boil down to this. There are, two big countries, Russia to a lesser extent, but China specifically, that have been buying the oil, that have been, giving the advice, that have been sending parts, that have been helping with, the finances. It comes down to China. And the question is, no one else has been willing to do this in the past. So does Trump have what it takes?
Well, sort of. It comes down to China in the sense that China was a huge purchaser of Iranian oil and purchased about 80% of it. Iran can't even export it now or get it outside the Persian Gulf. So that well of money has dried up. Now, will the Chinese trade with Iranians otherwise? Yeah, to a degree, but without Iranian oil, there isn't much to trade. Now that the United Arab Emirates, a key hub, a key revolving door for shadow financing, has been cut off for the Iranians, in addition to these secondary sanctions, which are going to have to be policed on an ongoing basis. We're having discussions almost certainly with the Chinese right now about different levers that we can pull, trying to allow the Chinese to save some face here to some degree and not do this in public. Now, as for the Strait, no, the Iranians have not squirreled away a whole lot. The last 13-day bombing campaign really decimated their ability to interfere with trade in the Persian Gulf almost completely. Trade ships through the Persian Gulf up 400% in the last week. If you count pipelines, you're looking at 70 to 85% of oil, pre-war oil volumes exiting the Persian Gulf now. Iran is in a deteriorating situation, especially with new pipelines being built. They're not able to exert the type of leverage that they thought. Oil prices down $2 today in spite of this massive new level of economic warfare. So Iran's in a world of hurt economically.
Yeah. Mr. Jordan, I'm glad you brought up the UAE, because that's also been something interesting. Watching the new shifting dynamics there. First they pull out of OPEC, and then they came out with that very clear message saying that they were going to be cutting off finances, cutting off any kind of financial interactions with Iran. So, Mr. Mendenhall, do you sense that there is sort of a realignment in the Middle East right now? Because last week, I believe it was, we had Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Pakistan get together and create their own little coalition, and certainly Saudi Arabia is the one that has been very concerned about the Iranian regime staying in power, and so far we're not seeing them being toppled. What do you sense is going on in the Middle East and the alignment there?
Well, the Iranians clearly hate us more than they love life, the regime that is, and so they're making all these decisions that make no sense to rational people. And so they've alienated all of their neighbors. And their neighbors, by the way, you mentioned UAE, that's a big one that's going to be leaving OPEC, but basically all those countries that also use the Strait of Hormuz, they're restricted economically when they can't export their oil. So much of the economic pressure on our economy, and in fact the global economy for that matter, has come from these external factors, these high energy prices related to tensions with Iran and the Strait of Hormuz, rather than any kind of broad deterioration in our domestic economy. And so if these geopolitical risks subside, some of this pressure may ease as well. I think that it's actually no surprise that gas prices went down a little bit. I think this is actually an interesting move for us economically. I think it's a step toward getting the Strait of Hormuz fully open and to bringing gas prices sort of back to normal.
And Mr. Jordan, I believe you've written a little bit about, the proxies, the infrastructure, the targets, basically, the target-rich environment there in the Middle East. So where do you see the difference between military deterrence and then sanctions coming in and being able to be used without destabilizing the world economy? Have we been trying to balance that? And if so, have we done that correctly?
Yeah, welcome to warfare in the 21st century, where wars are not just fought about economics, they're fought with economics, Edie. And here we're able to create enormous dislocation inside the Iranian regime. The Iranian leadership knows that they cannot sustain it. The Speaker of their parliament admitted as much yesterday. Pezeshkian, their president, called for an end of the war at the end of last week. There's a real schism. It's not that the Iranians have behaved irrationally. In a way, they've behaved very rationally in the sense that we've trained them over 47 years of failed efforts to dealing with the regime that, yes, if you raise the economic temperature, you raise the pressure, the Americans will fold. The Europeans are, sold out to Iran for so long, they'll never do anything to upset Tehran. So we've trained them over 47 years that if you raise the pressure, we will fold. And President Trump is not folding. Yes. In fact, if anything is raising the pressure, and that's something the Iranian system is only having to grapple with now for the very first time.
Yeah. And Mr. Mendenhall, you wrote something that I'd love you to expand on a little bit. And you wrote this. You said the maritime disruptions to the Strait of Hormuz are a masterful economics lecture delivered by reality. So what did you mean with that, and how do you see it?
Oh, well, that was an article from several months ago, but it was just talking about how the Strait of Hormuz teaches you all kinds of basic economic principles about supply and demand, about shortages, about trade-offs, and all those types of things. So that was a simple article about just how you can look at an international situation and learn basic economic principles for it. But what I'll say, just kind of piling on here on Iran, is it's got inflation right now around 70 to 90%, and its currency is in utter collapse, and its cost of living is soaring. So unfortunately, the Iranian people aren't armed and can't just rise up. But this is a situation where the financial pressure is really, really effective.
Yeah, and we know that the sort of what kicked all of this off was when the shopkeepers, the very people that really had propelled the Shah out and the rise of the regime, the current regime, when they then said, "Hey, wait a second, this is just so bad, we're joining the rest of the population." I have not heard much since then. I know they stayed away and had kind of given legitimacy to the movement to oust the regime for a bit, but I don't know where that is now. So do you, Mr. Jordan, do you have a sense of what's going on there on the ground?
Well, let's look at a couple of things. You have certain members of the Iranian government, the Speaker of their parliament and their president, saying things like this has to end. In fact, saying we cannot sustain this. Admitted that within the last 24 hours. They, however, do not largely control the guns in the jails. That's the IRGC and the Sepah, their security services. But there's a wild card here, Edie, that nobody's really looking at. And that is the regular army called the Artesh. And they outnumber the Republican Guard by 2.5 to 3 to 1. And they also have guns. And their ranks are filled out by regular people that are not benefiting from the corrupt kleptocracy of the Iranian regime. The Iranian regime has, like the IRGC has certain political officers and control mechanisms they have on the Artesh, but I would be looking at the regular army. And the regular army is something the regime was too scared of to use to crush some of the revolts that they had a few months ago and a few years ago, because they didn't fully trust the Artesh's in desire to turn on their own people. So that's kind of what I'm watching right now, too.
Very, very interesting. I had not heard anybody talking about that recently, so appreciate you bringing that up. John Jordan and Alan Mendenhall, thank you both for your time.